Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. In this episode, we continue to work our way through the pillars of Longhorn. Longhorn is important for developers to understand today because it helps them prepare for the great Windows applications we can develop in the future. We've already talked about Indigo, WinFS. In today's episode, we're going to focus on Avalon, the graphical subsystem that you develop your applications with. But before we get to that, let's check in with Erica and the news.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers. Welcome to the MSDN News Update. In March, Microsoft debuted the ISV Show, a Microsoft Studios production that highlights key technology directions and opportunities for emerging independent software vendors. Host Larry Gregory, Technology Specialist Manager for Microsoft, will interview new guests each month about Microsoft's target scenarios and new ideas for industry solutions. On March 24th, Microsoft announced XNA, a next-generation software development platform. Microsoft XNA is the catalyst for a new ecosystem of interchangeable, interoperable software tools and technologies from Microsoft, middleware, and game development companies. The XNA development platform will serve as the foundation for future game platforms from Microsoft, including Windows, Xbox, and Windows mobile-based devices. On March 29th at Electronical USA with the Embedded Systems Conference, Microsoft announced a technology preview kit for Windows C 5.0, previously codenamed Macallan. The final version of Microsoft Windows C 5.0 will focus on increasing developer productivity through a variety of feature enhancements, including increased out-of-the-box hardware support, security enhancements, advanced multimedia capabilities, and automated testing tools. On April 6th, Microsoft launched a new website, Channel 9, which uses weblogs, forums, wikis, and streaming video to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the people behind Whidbey, Yukon, and Longhorn. Check out channel9.msdn.com for a new level of communication between Microsoft and developers. And this has been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Welcome back. As I mentioned, today we're going to talk about Avalon. Now, Avalon is essentially the graphic subsystem for Longhorn. It covers not only the standard graphics things you might deal with drawing lines and figures and stuff like that, but controls, media, documents, virtually anything that paints a pixel on the screen. And we've got a lot of great advances in Avalon that you might not have seen in something like GDI or even GDI+. Here to share some of these ideas about what Avalon is from an architectural standpoint and from an application standpoint are Pablo Fernicola and David Ornstein. Thanks for joining me.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Why don't you tell us exactly what you guys do on the Avalon team?
So I'm the group program manager on what we call the Avalon core, which are all the graphics, media integration services, text, as well as the core 3 services, property system, and things like that. So the foundation where we build the rest of Avalon.
And I'm a lead program manager on the documents portion of the Avalon team, and we're building sort of the document juice in the mix there.
Mm-hmm. As I kind of mentioned in the intro, that Avalon is more than just the standard GDI layer. It includes an awful lot of things that previously we didn't really have in Windows from a developer standpoint. What are some of these key features, and why do you think they're important to have in Avalon itself rather than these little tack-on pieces?
Well, it's interesting because you go from a model of having these little islands of functionality. If you want to think of, for example, GDI as one island that gave you 2D and gave you text. You can think of having Direct Show as another island that gave you video, another island, for example, for doing audio, and then you have Direct 3D for doing 3D graphics. All of this provided a separate programming model. You know, the programming model was different. The way that you used them was different. In many cases, you could not interoperate between them. There wasn't a lot that tied them together, except perhaps an H-wind. You know, all of them would target an H-wind at a certain point. With the work that we're doing in Avalon, you see a very high level of integration across all of different media types. And the nice thing is that the integration extends not only from the graphics, but also to things like controls, as well as documents, and also outside of the Avalon pillar, as you go to things like WinFS and Indigo. So the things that you learn, for example, in terms of how properties work, or even the way that you catch exceptions, or how the variables are named. All those things that you learn in one technology translate to all the other technologies, even across pillars.
So I mean, in the past, where we had all these different islands and we're pulling them together, it's very similar to what we've been seeing in .NET itself, of pulling together all the technologies under a common API. Now we're actually doing it, pulling everything together under a common, model, a graphics model within Longhorn. Are we maintaining some of the capabilities? So if someone that's used to something like DirectX, are they still going to see the DirectX model inside of it? Or are they working in a more concrete model focused on application side of development?
So that's an interesting question that we get fairly often. And there's two parts to that. So all of the things that you're able to do today in terms of using GDI, using Direct 3D, using GDI Plus, for example, all those things continue to work in Longhorn. We don't have any major changes to those parts, neither in terms of getting better or in terms of getting worse. They continue to work in the same way. But once you move to actually using the Avalon APIs, for example, for doing graphics, that's where you get a lot of the benefits, and that's where the investment is from the point of view of the company, where we're looking at things like our imaging APIs, our 3D APIs, our 2D APIs, text. It all goes through the same backend. It all uses Direct 3D as acceleration layer. And that's a huge boost in many different ways. One of them being everything gets hardware accelerated. That's where if you look at the hardware folks, over the past 5 years or so, they've been heavily investing on 3D, on the 3D hardware. So now everything that you do in Windows, from drawing a menu to drawing some text to putting some images, is going to be able to leverage that 3D hardware that's largely sitting unused today, unless you're doing gaming, for example.
But how important is 3D to a word processor? I mean, do I really need to take and have a button that's got 3D spinning globes and stuff like that? Aren't we just going to run into this whole problem we had of animated GIFs on the websites and multiple fonts and junk, all that sort of stuff?
So the interesting thing is, think of when you're drawing text with Avalon, just plain text, lines of text. We go ahead and leverage the 3D hardware to draw that. So from a programming model, all you know is that you're drawing text, or you're putting down a menu or having a button in your form. Behind the scenes, we do all the work to transform that button or that text into a set of triangles and a set of textures that then get filtered and rendered by the hardware. So you get better performance and you get better quality, even though the things that you're doing are still 2D. So you'll be doing 2D things through the 3D pipeline, and that is the big game.
So if you want to adding a shadow layer to a text, you're actually doing the shadow through the 3D stuff rather than just taking the 2D text and offsetting a little teeny bit.
That's correct.
If you thought about a slide presentation, right, where you had a nice gradient background and a bunch of color and so forth, and then you lay a bunch of text on top of that, the quality that you're going to be able to get because of the integration of the platform and all these layers, and in fact using the common presentation infrastructure down at the bottom, gives you a much higher quality result.
So it's not so much about allowing people to do all sorts of fancy dancing babies and stuff like that in their apps. It's more of just adding a sense of quality to the overall application.
I think that's right. The other stuff kind of comes for free, and it's useful in certain situations, but we're not trying to turn all of your flat documents into flashing Broadway lights and so forth.
So we're not doing this to get Clippy, a better looking Clippy in Word, right?
You found us out, actually.
Now, David, I know you're involved with some of the document concept of things. How are understanding documents better coming into Longhorn Avalon?
Well, there are sort of three places where we're trying to make the world better for documents in Windows. One is for developers, one is for content, people who are producing content, and one is for end users. So, and at the bottom of all of that is really trying to provide a set of building blocks that deal with document-related things, all the way from the shape of the characters on the screen and the quality of the text there, all the way up through layout and printing and all that kind of stuff, and how people manipulate the documents and the end user experience through the browser, for example. So we're building a set of reusable building blocks in some senses as part of the platform API that give you services that you can use as an application developer to do things that are document-centric. If you're building a word processor, if you're building an invoicing system and so forth, to help you don't have to build as many of those things from scratch because there are services that you can use in the platform, and the end user gets sort of a better experience, more consistent experience across applications from those things.
And it probably makes more sense specifically if I'm not a word processor. If I'm a word processor, then I'm imagining my core competency is at actually doing document layout stuff. But if I'm an invoicing system, that's not my core competency, and I don't want to have to be spending time doing that sort of stuff. In the past, the invoicing app would either look fairly ugly, or they would just simply be embedding a web browser object using HTML for doing the document layout. But now we're actually thinking about actually having the concept of a document model being part of the application itself.
Right, and I'll give you an example, another example of the level where the sort of integration across not only documents but user interface related things comes into play. If you think about if I were building an application that let me browse through a catalog of videos, right, and I could see clips about the videos and background information and bios and all this kind of stuff. Today, if you were building that, you'd probably allocate some pretty fixed regions in your user interface for those pieces of information. But as a result of the fact that the layout infrastructure is common across all of these things, your buttons, your panes, and your text, you can actually construct those things without carving out these absolutely sized regions. So you make your window bigger, everything resizes, and all the text does a rational thing. You don't have to think about, okay, I've just got these 6 lines of text that are fixed in this place. It'll literally, repaginate and break things across pages where necessary. And so the integration of text and the layout stuff really gives a better experience, even when you're dealing with something that's more than just text.
Mm-hmm. And plus also work in a common fashion. So a user using one application with the reflow and columns and junk like that, another application will act and look the same way.
Right. I mean, how many different ways are there to turn pages in various applications on Windows, right? There's a lot of different ways to do it, and some of those are different for a good reason, but in general, they're different just because there's no common way to do it. And so providing some of those building blocks is kind of good for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
The integration aspect that David was talking about is super important. When you look at things like the wide aspect displays today, the 16:9 displays, when you start using those is really when you notice how bad we do today in terms of layout and layout paradigms that we use. Because you do end up with this little box of text that only occupies 1/4 of your screen. And even if you stretch the window to cover your whole display, the text is only about 1/4 or 1/3. And the whole rest of the display is either blank or it's not really utilized. Whereas with the work that we're doing in terms of layout, which crosses both documents and controls, you can have both UI and content that actually do go ahead and fill up the rest of the space and either allow you to view more content or give you a better reading experience reviewing that content. There are some demos that we've done with multi-column layout, where if you have your document, let's say in a constrained space, you would only get one column of the document, one paragraph. And as I make the window larger, that can go to 2, 3, or more columns. Still giving the developer or the content author control over that. If they want to limit, for example, and say I can only have 2 columns, that's up to them. But otherwise, the system can adapt and provide the best experience to the end user, depending on what hardware they're on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, today, even if they did take and use up the entire width of the wide monitors, you would have a line of 8-point font text that's going clear across the screen, and that's a very bad reading experience.
Yeah, in fact, it's a very bad neck experience because your head is doing this, right? It's very hard.
Oh, there's
your eye,
isn't it?
when your eye comes back to try to find the beginning of the next line, it's hopeless, which is why, I mean, people in the newspaper world understand. You split things up into these smaller columns because it's easier for the eye to track that stuff. And so there's a level of kind of, so you start with a set of building blocks that don't know anything about that, and developers can kind of lay things out however they want. But in situations where you want the system to just kind of take care of the readability for you, you can just pour a pile of text in and say, make it readable. And it knows about things like optimum line lengths for reading and font sizes and the amount of white space you want between the lines, and it'll actually do a lot of that layout for you automatically, so you get a much better reading experience without having to put a lot of effort, sort of a typographer in the box for you.
In some ways, if you think of the time when we released Longhorn, it's not that we expect that developers will actually write more lines of code per day, and that's how they're going to be more productive. We actually expect that they'll just write the same number of lines of code per day, but actually they'll have more functionality behind those lines. Or in fact, when we talk about layout and typography, they may actually have to write less lines of code per day and get more benefits out of it.
Mm-hmm. So they're spending less time on code that's not their core competency, and they're able to write their forms management or their invoices.
The analogy that I always use is so a long time ago in the world of DOS, everybody's application had a different way that they did menus, right? 1, 2, 3, and all these different, everybody did them differently, and everybody had to write their own. And with the introduction of Windows, we said, look, there are a set of common problems, the way buttons work, the way menu bars work. There's no reason for everybody to invent those differently. It's not relevant to what you're trying to do in the software and the value you're trying to give your customers. So we build those things once, you get these reusable services that are part of the platform, and it's just not, you don't want to waste your time doing it. And so we're doing that across the platform in a whole range of areas where it's just not important for people to have to think about how to do really spectacularly rendered characters at sub-pixel boundaries to get high readability. Nobody's going to do that work on their own. But if the system just gives it to you for free, you'll take advantage of that. If you're building a video game, you're going to do work to get the 3D stuff to work. Nobody else is going to be willing to pay the effort. But if it kind of comes for free, then you get a lot of advantage out of it. So,
So I mean, a program like Mathematica, for instance, I mean, they are a very nice document, editing application where you can create this whole big rich document. Their core competency is dealing with mathematical formulas and rendering those in beautiful types of function graphs like that. But in order to allow the user to have access to that, they had to write a full-fledged word processor. And so now they can take and focus on their core competency and allow the word processing capability, whether it's spell checking or whatever, kind of coming in through the system that they're hooking into.
I'll give you another example that's not in the sort of visual and layout space. We provide a set of services to do digital signatures and documents, set of building blocks that you can build in. So again, Mathematica, if your core competency is, really, and you're really focused on building software that deals with documents that have math in them, your customers might like the ability to have their documents be more securable and, be able to have people sign them and so that it's clear where they came from and they haven't been tampered with. If that's, a weekend of work for a developer because the system gives you the building blocks, you might build that in and have a much better product for your customers, even if that alone is not going to be something where you're going to take a whole part of your development team and put them on that for the set of features, right? And so trying to bring a broader set of services that let you trust the content that you're dealing with in the digital signature space, in the rights management space, a set of building blocks, again, available for developers, is an example of more document-related building blocks, not just document and other stuff too, but particularly document-related building blocks that are part of the platform. That's not just the visual layout stuff.
And just to make a pitch for a feature that came in recently, that your audience will see when we do the refresh of the build that we give at the PC, is annotations. So for example, you may have, you may even have done something with digital rights or signatures, but now you want to be able to have the document be passed around by different people and add annotations to it. So in the last few weeks, we added annotations as a service. So developers will be able to take advantage of that as well.
Now, a thing you mentioned earlier about, the reflow and stuff like that, being able to deal with the new monitor size and stuff like that. That's kind of related to another thing I think is kind of exciting about Avalon, and that's dealing with the high density monitors, where you have quite dense pixel resolutions. And with Avalon's vector capabilities now, that actually allows it still to look very nice. So like right now, with a pixel-based orientation, you run an application, the application's this big on your really high density monitor, your icons are about like, like this big sitting on it. Talk to us about more of the vector capabilities of Avalon and how that's taking use in applications.
Yeah. So first, I'm actually going to tie it back to something that you said when we first opened the show, which is if I'm using the current APIs, what do I get out of Longhorn? And this is a good example of it, where there are a few monitors on the market today that are, for example, 200 dpi. IBM has one of them. It costs right now, I think, around $6,000 or $8,000. A couple of years ago, it used to cost $20,000. So by the time we ship Longhorn, it should be even more affordable. But if you take an existing application, a Win32 GDI-based application, and you run it on this 200 dpi monitor, you run exactly into the issue that you mentioned, where all of my icons are so tiny that they're unusable. And there's nothing that you can do about it because they were drawn with bitmaps. So if you write a native Avalon app, that's a problem you're not going to have because that will be taken care of for you. But even for old applications, one of the things that we're doing is we're applying this image scaling algorithm to applications. So without the application have to have any change made to it, we usually use Notepad as our test app. So without having to make any changes to the application, the users will have a better experience on higher density monitors than they would otherwise. Is not as good as a native Avalon application because there's, we're basically doing an image stretch. We're doing a lot of filtering if the hardware has it. So it's not native resolution as an Avalon application would be, but it still is a gain for existing applications in that system. Now on the native side, if you're writing new Avalon applications or taking advantage of Avalon controls or Avalon documents, all that is resolution independent. So there are a bunch of things that we call future proofing in terms of the platform. Resolution independence being one of them. Another thing that we have is, for example, all of our coordinates for vectors and positioning, they're all double precision floats. A couple of other things in terms of future proofing that are interesting are 64-bit. So if you write to the WinFX APIs, through managed code, your application just runs on 64-bit without you having to do any additional work. So there are any number of things that we're looking at in terms of future proofing.
So I mean, I think that's a good point because Windows isn't necessarily just this big stake in the ground. I mean, we've seen those stakes come in previously, whether it's the Windows 1.0, 3.0, Windows 95, Windows NT, and we're constantly evolving the platform. And the applications then have to also at the same time be evolving along with the platform if they want to take advantage of these. And we're just kind of continually trying to improve the capabilities for the users and the developers of the applications. Yeah.
That's right. Another good example is tablet, which today you actually have to write extra code to take advantage of tablet capabilities in terms of being able to have the pen and some of the interaction with the buttons. Those are things that are just built into the platform. And another one that's also new is a Media Center Edition, and that again ties with the resolution issues that you were talking about and with vectors, where when you want to go to this sort of more immersive 10-foot viewing distance, a lot of the things that we're doing for our controls and for graphics and for layout are really a big advantage on that.
Now, a lot of our audience out there is currently writing applications. Some of them aren't quite ready to start thinking about Longhorn, developing Longhorn applications. Are there things, even on an existing Win32 or .NET application today, that people should be thinking about in order to prepare for Avalon and Longhorn in the future?
We touched on this a little bit last time we talked at the PDC, and our recommendation is still the same. The best way for you to get ready for Longhorn is to start using managed code, is to start developing WinForms. And then once you go a step beyond that, you probably want to separate your logic from the display so that you're already writing managed code, you have all your logic in managed code. So then for Longhorn, you can actually replace the display part of it, going from WinForms migrating to Avalon. And you can still use some of your WinForms controls. For example, if you invest in making new controls for WinForms, you can still leverage that and make it part of your application. But that's a really nice progression. Go from native code to managed code to WinForms, WinForms to the separation between the logic and the presentation, and that gives you a good path to get to WinFX.
And I think that there's an important thing underneath that, which is that when you're moving to managed code, what you're going to encounter in .NET and in the framework and so forth is a level of consistent application of a set of principles as a programmer, things that you experience, the way properties work, the way events work. There's thousands of them, right? And one of the kind of core tenets about the .NET stuff is that the developer experience is usable, right? We do usability testing on user interfaces. We do usability testing on developer interfaces. And a lot of the work that we're doing in Avalon is really built around those same principles, which if you've been writing a lot of unmanaged code for a while, when you move to .NET, you're going to discover there are all sorts of ways that things are done because they work well. And so what Pablo is saying is not just please move to whatever happens to be what's available now, but it actually is in fact those same principles that we are building on so that the transition is, well, for two reasons. So the transition is smoother, and because we think the principles that are underlying the existing stuff really work.
So we're not changing things just for the sake of changing things and saying, okay, I've got to get new versions, I've got to make it look kind of different, got to change what the hood looks like or the tail lights or something like that. But we're actually trying to increase the user experience and developer experience at the same time. Okay. Now, speaking of the developer experience, why don't we spend a bit of time talking about XAML? Because in my mind, that's a very deep part of what Avalon is and what the capability it brings to the developer and how it kind of changes the way a developer actually approaches writing an application for Longhorn. So what exactly is XAML?
It's interesting because again, it touches into the issue of having things that cross different, different technologies or different pillars. And in this case, if you look at XAML in relation to documents and XAML in relation to your applications, XAML is the same thing. It's basically this XML description that has a schema that allows you to define controls and allows you to define graphical shapes. It allows you to define layout. It allows you to define data binding. Probably the key factor on this, though, is the way that you express things in XAML has a one-to-one correspondence with the programming model that you see when you come from code. So whatever you can do in XAML, you can do in code, and you do it in the same way. The variables, the methods, the properties, they're all named the same, and so the knowledge just translates directly. Beyond that, though, if the thing I'm writing is a document, I'll be using XAML, and that's how I'll generate my document. If the thing I'm writing is the UI for my application, I'll be using XAML. And if the thing I'm writing is something that mixes UI and content, I'll still be using XAML. So the same concepts and the same elements, translate across those two boundaries. The other interesting part in relation to XAML is it is this focus point that allows me to bring a lot of people and a lot of disciplines together. So it's not just the developer consuming XAML as a resource to describe the UI, but it's also the designer being able to define the XAML, which then goes to the developer. And then I can have my content producer that's translating some XML data source to produce some document content, which then brings together with the thing that the designer did and plays into the thing that the developer does. So you can see XAML as very much this interchange and focal point where you can bring all these disciplines together. And now if you go one step beyond this, is not just the kind of disciplines and people that it brings together, but also these different tools. Because maybe I started with my XAML on one tool over here. I then brought my XAML to another tool and added some kind of functionality, maybe added some controls. I started with some graphics, I added some controls, then I brought it into another tool that, for example, has better designing mechanisms onto it. And I added some content, and then I brought it into Visual Studio, for example. And now I'm going to do my code behind. So it very much starts to anchor a lot of the developer experience in WinFX.
And if you compare that, for example, to the process of building a website today, the canonical experience is the designers go off with Photoshop and they create these beautiful mock-ups, and then they have these Photoshop files, which are static graphics files. And then somehow you have to get from that to your web pages, right? And the discontinuity and the coordination and the effort and all the stuff that's required there is really, it's a challenge, right? And by having a common set of technology infrastructure pieces like XAML in particular underneath, it makes that whole process a heck of a lot easier.
But if XAML is such a one-to-one correspondence to the C# code and stuff like that, why don't we just write the applications totally in XAML? Why even have C# or VB.NET or COBOL.NET or something like that we're running as well?
So the content that you put in XAML is declarative in nature. So whenever you want to have logic, for example, when the mouse hits 10 pixels, do something, or what happens after you press the button. So those things is where the code comes in. The XAML describes both the layout. It can describe the relationship between objects. This object is contained with another object. It can also describe data relationships. For example, I have a list box, and the data for this list box comes from this data source. But actually, the logic, what are the actions to be taken, is where you put the code behind. Interesting enough, I want to make sure that some of your viewers don't get worried. You don't always have to use XAML. There'll be a number of applications that will be just code only. So if you feel comfortable with just doing code and that's all you want to do, you can just do C#, VB, -C++, whatever you want. But we do feel that over time you'll see this process where most things that you'll see are a combination of markup and code, especially if you want to do things like localization. The localization model and the accessibility model, in fact, are tied to XAML. So when you want to do those things, you would use XAML for that.
So it's worth underscoring why if you say, okay, I'm not going to do any XAML right now, but I want to do this Avalon thing, it's worth looking at kind of what's under the covers there and why that you still actually get almost many of the benefits. So the simplest way, this is how I think about XAML, at least the implementation on Longhorn. When you parse XAML, the parser goes and it looks through all these XML elements, and when it finds an XML element, it goes and looks up a .NET class that's got the same name, and it creates one of those objects, and takes all the attributes in the XML element, and it sets the properties with those same names. So it's kind of like a declarative description of this graph, a collection of .NET objects. Because the names of everything in the markup line up perfectly with the object model that you program against, what that means is, if you put the markup aside and you just program directly against that, it's the same object model. So all the integration that Pablo and I have been talking about around layout and eventing and coordinate systems and all these different things, those are inherent in the programming model. XAML is an easy declarative way to get at that, but even if you aren't using that, you still get the value of that integration.
Plus also, it sounds like if you're a designer and you're using, Paint Shop or some other application to interact with the XAML, and you're setting the brush colors and the fonts and stuff like that, the names you're using to describe how you're manipulating that layer is the exact same concept and language and property names that the developer is thinking about. So now the
So you can
designer and the
communicate
developer
with each
actually
other.
talk that together.
Right, and this is, I mean, if you build things in DHTML today, right, this is, you have the object model that you're programming against, and then the names of these things in the JavaScript, and then the names of the things in the HTML, and they're all similar, modulo, some abbreviations and some capitalization, and that's sort of that can cause a great deal of frustration and just sort of slows you down, right? If you learn it, one of the key tenets is if you learn it in one place, you got to be able to use it in 5 others, and that really helps. I think people who are building on top of the platform go a lot faster.
I mean, it does sound that we're kind of building upon what's come in the past. We're building upon some of the knowledge we learned from developing Windows as an application model, but we're also learning about what we learned about with the document object model of IE and dynamic HTML.
A
and
lot of the
scripting and so
readability
forth.
stuff that we're doing, we learned doing Microsoft's eBooks products.
Yeah. But the one thing that brings to mind, though, is that, okay, in the Longhorn world, what happens to the web pages? What happens to a developer that's doing web stuff? Do we now tell them to take and write XAML smart client applications? Or do we tell them to continue doing web pages and just like do IE type stuff? What's the crossover?
It is all driven by the audience and what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So in some cases, they'll find that their audience, for example, is Longhorn-centric. So it makes sense for them to have a content that is Avalon-based and served by a web server. In other cases, maybe the application that they were trying to build was either very hard to do in HTML or not possible. For example, if I wanted to do something that had 3D visualization of data, or even the way that I did data binding, maybe HTML with scripting was not the best environment for doing development. And in those cases, it's just a natural outgrowth where you say, well, I'll just go ahead and use XAML or use Avalon to do this. So it was really a combination of what the audience is, as well as what are the things that I want to do, and does the platform that I'm using today really give me the scalability, programmability, and features that I need to achieve what I want to do?
Does it provide the user the right value? I mean, like a good example is this weekend, I was helping my dad configure his new Windows laptop, Windows XP, and I showed him how we could take and use Outlook and connect up to his Hotmail email account. And as soon as I showed him that, he had no idea that he needed it. Then I showed it to him, and he goes, my God, that fixes a lot of the things, the frustrating problems I was having trying to use a web-based account. I wasn't able to open up multiple email windows and get things back and forth one to the other and see what's going on. And so that's a case where email probably isn't the right thing to do on a web page, and you would want to be a smart client. Whereas maybe taking and doing a Amazon.com shopping experience, maybe that sort of thing that actually works fairly well on a website.
And you actually have this today where there are many sites where they actually have a client that you can download that will enhance your experience. And going through that process of building that client today and deploying that client today is not trivial. And with the work that we're doing for Longhorn, it actually makes that a lot easier. But it is important to highlight that we don't think that HTML is going to go away. As far as a format that you want to interchange between many different platforms and many different users, it's going to be here for us for a long time. Especially the amount of content that's out there. It's not reasonable to expect that that would change. But there are certain situations and certain types of users where doing something that's Longhorn specific, it totally makes sense.
So websites that are struggling to provide the functionality on the web, maybe they should be looking at writing Longhorn applications. Websites that are perfectly happy with the functionality, maybe there's no reason to
That's
take
right.
and do a Longhorn application. Are there still going to be features of Longhorn that they could take advantage of if they knew that the user was looking at them from a Longhorn machine?
So you'll be able to, for example, take a frame within your HTML page and then put Avalon content within a frame. So if you wanted to do some of the readability things in relation to documents, the multi-column, the flow, the pagination, you would actually be able to put a frame within your HTML content, point it to a XAML file, and get a better readability experience for your end users. You would just detect from the server side where my client's coming from, and it would be invisible to the end user.
Okay. We're about out of time. In closing, are there any key points you think is really important to get across to the audience? And where would you recommend the audience go to next if they're interested in more information about Avalon applications, how it's going to affect maybe their application flow in the future, and when they should start thinking about it?
I'll make a pitch for the Longhorn Developer Center. It's definitely, under MSDN, is definitely a place to go to get the latest information, get access to presentations we've done in the past, new samples, pointers to blogs. Chris Sells is the guy that runs that, and it's just a great resource for information. There's also news groups. We have a set of news groups, and they're actually linked from the Longhorn Developer Center. And news groups are nice because there's a lot of two-way conversations in news groups. I go through the news groups every night, and we find a lot of questions, a lot of comments that we find invaluable. I think that even if people are not able to code to Longhorn just yet, because they're busy with their other products and releases, if they could just read the material and start asking questions in terms of what features they need or provide feedback on the things that they read, that would be invaluable to us.
Or I suppose even providing feedback of the type of applications they're currently developing and why they think it does or doesn't make sense for them to move that to Longhorn or something like that. Helps you guys understand what is the developer community actually needing out of Longhorn.
Indeed.
I don't have much to add except just that that's really the most valuable and sort of the hardest to get kind of feedback, right? I mean, you'd think we would be inundated by feedback, and we hear a lot, but we really, every day we go looking out in those places in the community where we're in blogs and news groups and so forth, discussion forums and stuff like that, really to understand what our customers and what our developers are doing. And you may post some stuff up there that'll engender 2 or 3 replies on the web, and there may be 6 or 8 or 10 hours of discussion here to really make sure we understand what it is that you're looking for and why what we're doing is working for you or not working for you and so forth. So those are really, I just want to underscore, I guess, the things that Pablo said.
I mean, I guess kind of to what you're saying basically is that just like the application vendors out there in the audience, they might be developing an application and they're constantly needing to have feedback from their customers.
Yep.
I mean, the developers to a certain extent are our customers right now because we're trying to develop a new platform that is specifically targeted at solving the problems that developers are trying to solve within their applications. That's what it means to be an application platform, I guess.
Yep.
And in many ways, is solving the problems that they're going to have 2, 5, 10 years from now. So in many ways, also hearing about what kind of things they want to do in the future and where they want to take their products would also be helpful, not just looking back.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
So after this brief break, we're going to come back and take a look at some actual programming examples of what it means to write an application in XAML for Avalon, and hopefully give you some insight of what it might mean to move your application to this new application model on top of Longhorn. So stay tuned.
So as you heard me talk about earlier, Microsoft has a new site out, Channel 9. And this next video you're going to see is shows the original creators of Channel 9, the 5 wacky guys at Microsoft, just talking about the concepts and ideas behind Channel 9. So enjoy.
That was the inspiration for Channel 9 in many ways. I started thinking, how can we keep the party going? You know, how can the PDC live on? How can we all get a chance to know each other and to share some of those stories about why we like to build software or why we're into what we do, or, you know, to be angry and share, you know, feedback about things that don't work and to share things that we're excited about. So that was really it. You know, I came out of this, this cold medicine haze and I started
Excellent.
thinking, man, you know, when I was in my early 20s, there was this moment that I had where a friend of mine was almost in a plane crash. I told you guys about this in the beginning. And this is side of the personal side of the story about why I call it, why the Channel 9 idea even came about. But this friend of mine who I worked with was on this plane, and the thing lost its hydraulics out of San Francisco International. They'd just taken off, and suddenly it started doing wacky movements, and before you know it, the stewardesses were looking panicked, and they came back and said, you know what? We've got a problem. We lost our hydraulics, and we don't know if we can actually land this thing. We can't even steer it very well right now. And, you know, it freaked me out, you know, because I fly a lot, and I never really thought about how the fact that sometimes there's two guys up in the front that control a couple hundred people's lives. And I think that's how sometimes our customers feel when I talk to people. And the way I got over my fear of flying was actually to meet pilots. I learned a lot about how planes fly and about what things do, and I started thinking, man, how therapeutic could it be for people who hate us and who are afraid of us to
And we
figure
know you're out there.
And we know you're out
Just
there.
a few of you.
Because a lot of us, you know, some of us used to be you.
It's worse than that, because in the plane you're only flying for 2 or 5 hours, or on a really long flight, maybe 18 hours.
Right.
But with our products, you use them, you know, 14 hours a day.
Every day, man.
Every day. And that's why the flaws in products, you know, get accentuated and frustrate people.
You know, when the PDC came, you know, it was like this perfect, almost this perfect storm. You know, there's amazing content, stuff for like, you know, that, you know, with Longhorn, Yukon, and Whidbey. I think people out in the community were, you know, sick and tired of, you know, like a lot of the PR talk, and they were like gravitating to weblogs and having this conversation one-on-one. And, you know, it was, you know, it was amazing at a different time. But now it's like, okay, that was cool. Weblogs are great. But, you know, how can we take it to the next level? And I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to do and actually push ourselves. How can we be more open? How can we, you know, make this not just, you know, this is not just this produced thing. I don't exactly know what we're going to do next week or the week after next. But, you know, it's like, what do people want to see? And
well, I mean, they're gonna tell us what they want to see. I mean, right after our
I hope
first,
so.
Well, yeah, they tell us what they want, and we'll try and give it to them.
It's hard though, if you're on the outside, you don't have an idea of the scope of what this company's doing. I just came back from the Microsoft Tech Fest. You know, I saw really wild photo apps being designed. I saw, you know, all sorts of different algorithms to attack spam and other kinds of problems that we're having.
There's tons of crazy stuff. There's tons of cool things that are being done in companies like this, and that's what we got to figure out to do. I mean, that's why we started this whole thing, which is, you know, how can we let the world see a little bit more about what's going on with Microsoft? And more importantly, I think all of us agree, because we were all developers at one time on the outside, how do you become part of the conversation? Right? How can, you know, how do we open that dialogue up? I mean, I think that's why we all kind of came together on this project, is that we all believe that people should get a chance not only to see these things, but to talk about them with us and to let us know, is this working? Is this what you want? Is this where it's going? I mean, Channel 9 is about not just seeing into the cockpit and listening into the pilots flying the plane. It's about talking back, which is something you can't do on an airplane when you're listening to maybe Channel 9 on the radio system. And I think that's the big difference here is, you know, Robert knows this more than anyone from his time in the blogging world, right? I mean, blogs are about relationships. There's a conversation happening. Doc Searle said it in the Clue Train Manifesto. Markets are conversations. People are out there talking about your products, and if you're not at the table, you're missing out. Well, you know, we don't want to miss out, and that's why we're doing this. You know, we're kind of lucky to get the chance.
If you don't build remarkable products, people don't talk about you, or they ignore you. You know, or worse, they, you know, like we've seen in some of our communities, they heap scorn at you. So that's our challenge, is to take the feedback that we're getting and have a conversation, and then build great products that people use and like.
So how do you think we're going to do this first? So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to do video, right? Scobo's got his camera on the table here. We're going to go out there and you know, bring other parts of Microsoft. But what are you doing? Like, how are you going to teach people about what we're doing and who we are?
Well, I'm going around the campus and trying to figure out what people are working on and talking to some of the developers who are doing really interesting things.
Cool. Like who? Who's some of the examples of some of the people you guys are talking to?
Eric Gunnarsson. I'm talking to Alan Greiver, who's planning out the next version of Visual Studio right now.
We're going to talk to Chris Brum, Anders Heilsberg, and Patrick Dessous, the brains of the CLR.
Yeah,
that'll be nice.
And it's evolving. We're also trying to get into not just the stars that everybody knows in the community, but the normal everyday person who works here at Microsoft.
I think that's important too. Is the everyday normal people at Microsoft? Hey, hello, I got a mortgage too. You know, why? Len said, why are you here? Well, I got a kid to go to college next year, and I've got a mortgage and things like that. But it's also I'm passionate about what we're doing, and it's not about the rock stars all the time. It's some of the most amazing things that I've seen in this company is I run into somebody and I say, what are you working on? And then their eyes light up and it says, I'm working on this. Right, and they talk about all these cool things that they're doing, and it's like giving visibility to that. When I came here and I came to this company, I mean, I just remember I was just so blown away that I got this chance. Yeah. And I was like just blown away that I got here. And I remember when I was interviewing, I was like, okay, if I can just do a phone screen, I'll be happy with that. When I got to fly in for an interview, it was like, wow, I get a free trip to Redmond. It's going to end after that. I was like, you're hiring me? And when I got here, it was just so, it was so awesome. But I'm proud to be here. I'm proud of the company and what we do. I love building software.
I think everyone brings a different angle to the table about why they're doing this thing and what we hope to get out of it. I'm curious, what do you guys think would be the ultimate failure in pulling this show together and pulling this site together?
The ultimate failure?
Yeah. What do you think would really suck, or what do you think?
I think it would really suck if we found that customers really don't care what Christopher Brum does on the weekend or what Eric Lippert thinks about the Matrix. If they just really big deal. In other words, we give them this, we seed out this information about, hey, this is what Microsoft people are really like. The biggest failure for me would be that people don't care.
Yeah. I'm not sure that it's about people caring about what Christopher Brum does on the weekend. I think if people don't want to have a conversation like we're trying to give them, we're building this sort of forum site where people can go in and have a sort of different conversation than you have on a blog because it's a little bit more open. And if people aren't interested in having a conversation, I would be, on the one hand, I'd be surprised. On the other hand, I'd be sort of disappointed.
Yeah. We also fail too if we script it. If it's like we are going out and doing that. If people are, it's like, hi, Eric, we want to do an interview. And he's like sitting there going, okay, well, these are the things that I want to cover. These are the messages that I want to go across. And that just will blow.
Well, that's one reason we bought little tiny cameras and we're hand-holding them. It's not an ultimate professional video shoot, although this is a little over the top too.
This is about as produced as anything you're going to see on here. But this is how we're doing this. I mean, this is really 5 guys and a website. And this little handheld Canon camera here, a little DV camera, is how we're going out there. I mean, we're going out there, we're going to bring some of the people that you don't get to see at Microsoft to the forefront. We're going to show you what it's a little bit like to work at Microsoft, see some of the quirky things that are here. But more importantly, we're going to talk about the products and the problems you're having. We're going to try to figure out, how we can work together to make this thing click, I mean,
and
we
take them out to lunch. We take, we're planning to go to some of the developers' homes and catch them, while they're just playing around a little bit, to try to get outside of the corporateness.
It's also totally, and it's also just not the DV cameras. We're going to have somewhere down in on the site. There's going to be this a moblog. So it's like Microsoft employees taking pictures throughout the day, putting them up there, giving them a little tour of what's going on. There's writing, there's boards and things like that. The DV cameras are going to be pretty cool, but there's a lot of other things too.
Give people a chance to see inside.
How much filtering are we going to admit to?
How much filtering are we going to admit to?
How much filtering have we done?
How much filtering?
You've shot how many things?
Not yet.
How many things have you shot?
I've done 3. I've done camera crew on 3. So
if you're curious as to do we edit, yeah, absolutely. We're going to edit because I don't think you want to listen to an hour's worth of us rambling on about things that may not be interesting.
And there's a heck of a lot of boring to cut out.
That's true.
Oh my gosh,
we're a lot less interesting than we probably think in many ways, but that's okay. I mean, we're going to try to find the interesting things that are in there.
It's funny when I came back from shooting something. Everybody comes back from the shooting of something, they go, I got the most amazing thing on film. And everybody crowds around the office and we put it on. I'm like, yeah, this is just like crazy stuff. This is just the best ever. And you're watching and go, this sucks.
It's funny, I sat on one of my plane flights, I sat next to the camera crew from CNN. He was giving me camera tricks.
You got camera tricks. Scoble getting camera tips from CNN. Did he write about you on your blog?
No.
No?
He didn't
he
have
have
a
one?
blog.
Oh,
No.
okay.
He's not allowed to have a blog at CNN.
Really? Oh, that's right. There's a total ban on
Very,
those
you know,
things.
very few companies bigger than 10,000 people, employees, have blogs, have any blogs, and
Yeah.
we have more than 300 employees blogging here.
We
so.
even more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I just looked on that's just on blogs.msdn.com the other day. I'm going to get in trouble for this number because I'm going to get it wrong, but it's like go down and look on the left, you go to blogs.msdn,
Yeah.
and you look at the total blogs, and I forget what it was. I'll just pull a number like 384 or something like that. It's probably more now, and I was just like, that's just on there.
So you can't even have a personal blog at these companies?
Yeah, no.
Wow.
Because the PR methodology of the old school is to control the messaging, control everything that's presented about the company. And here we're in an experiment where we have no control.
Totally.
It's almost
you
peer
know,
pressure.
this
though.
is a
It's almost
piece
like
of the-
it's almost peer pressure of. It's like, okay, do you have a weblog? And then if you do, like, don't be lame and like do that. Hello, I'm a something in you know, I'm going to pick somebody's product and they're going to come up and send me a hate mail tomorrow thinking that I'm talking about them, but they come out and they say, you know, I'm on this product and I'm a C# person and this is the Hello World post.
Yeah.
And I bookmark every one of those ones and then I go back to them like a month later. Or you know, I say, okay, you made that first post, you took that leap, and then why
See what
didn't
happens.
what? And then they didn't make it. Or you know, some people do, and I'm like, wow, who is this guy?
It's a hard thing.
Some
to
people
believe.
write automated
Yeah.
postscripts.
Who does that?
Rob
Oh, no
posts
names, but
No
I mean,
names.
Morning
the
early.
people who are
He
propping the
doesn't.
most.
He doesn't automate the content of the post though. He just
No.
automates the timing.
Yeah, but he's probably. Yeah.
It is
The guy's writing code. He doesn't have a lot of time to do all those posts.
He's a
Different
smart
jobs
guy,
are-
right? He set it
Yeah.
up so they post in the morning.
You got
They're
it.
there when I get there in the
Yeah.
morning.
I was talking to somebody. This is why don't you weblog more? And I was like, there's so much work deciding about what I can weblog
Yeah.
and what I can't weblog about that this is like just almost like such a relief that we're doing this thing because
So
now
we can talk about
I
it.
can talk over whatever the hell I want to talk about because that's what our job is.
Yeah.
And
Although that's
cool.
not really true.
Well-
You know, in several meetings I attended, in fact, even at the Tech Fest, you know, I'd go up and they knew who I was, and it's like, don't blog this, please. Yeah.
But there's opinion blogging, and you know there's a lot of stuff that we're talking about, you know, your opinions on the industry and the things on our products. But you know, there's also just talking about your life and what it is that you do.
There's different kinds of sharing. I mean, there's different types of communication in the blog world and stuff, or in anything. You know, I mean, it's
That might be a good topic for discussion. Why do companies keep secrets? You know, why does Microsoft not reveal some things, and why does it reveal other things?
For the same one of the,
competitive edge. I mean,
Competitive
patents. It's the way the system works.
and
I
also
know
what
that.
Jeff was saying, we don't know if we're going to actually create something and release it. Why tell
Yeah.
people about it?
Welcome back. Now that we understand what Avalon means to you as an application developer, hopefully, I want to take and spend some time with some actual programmers and designers to help us talk about what Avalon really is. What are the pixels on the screen? What's the text in the files? And what is this all programming model all about? To help talk about this, I've got Nathan Dunlap and Rob Relyea. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Rob.
Now, can you maybe describe exactly what it is you do in Avalon?
I'm a program manager, and I focus on the programming model and the markup model that developers are going to use.
Okay. Nathan?
I'm a designer on the demo team. We've just been designing demos and trying to show the cool things that we can do with Avalon.
Because you're actually a designer, not a programmer.
Yep. Started as a graphic designer and just I was on the Internet Explorer SDK before and had a lot of opportunity doing web sample code. And because of that, I kind of evolved into being really ready for Avalon.
Okay. Now, hold on a second. Now, if you look at the bottom of the viewer here, there's a pause button. I want you to click the pause button, go out and find out whoever in your department is doing design work, get them in here to take a look at this. We're going to talk to a designer, not a programmer, but a designer, about what Longhorn means to them, and your designer might be interested in this too. So we'll wait for a couple seconds until you come back. Okay, hopefully they're back now. So, as a designer, developers want to know, what does Longhorn mean to you?
I think, you know, for developers as a designer, I get to lighten the load for the developers and get to quit being such an egg. Usually, you know, the stuff that I've done before, when you're developing your design, you have to conceptualize it, you know, on paper and then transfer to Photoshop in your image editor or anything like that. Use whatever tools you can, and then you have to go into production code. And usually at that point, I start losing control once it goes into production code and once it actually By the time it gets to fit and finish, there's very little I used to have to be handheld by the developer and what I get to go in and work with.
Because the changeover is, you're designing it and then you're basically passing pixels over to them, and that's about all it
Exactly,
is. But
yeah.
you're not really working in pixels. You're working in layers. You're working in vectors, and you're working design surfaces and stuff like that, and textures and fonts and all that stuff. But as soon as it leaves your machine, it's like all bets are off.
Yep. I mean, currently the image editors that designers have access to are just incredibly powerful, and you can do a lot of really great stuff with them. And the platforms don't support a lot of the cool visual features that these image editors allow you to do. And so what I've had to do is basically dumb down the visuals and make them ready for the platform that can use them. So, it had to be, if it was HTML, it had to become a GIF or a JPEG. And then there was all sorts of, hardware constraints and, technology constraints. We didn't want to make our images too big in file size, we could ship them across the network. But now, I can actually, export my graphics as vectors, things that are really lightweight, that draw great on high-resolution monitors. Not only just high-resolution monitors, but in different formats. So if I'm drawing for a small windowed application, or if I'm drawing for a full-screen application, a vector pretty much packages up the same size.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the power that for all the visual, like not even just vectors, but being able to use filters and transition type effects that you use in animation packages, all that stuff is available to you now. Being able to encroach into the 3D world and use a bunch of the 3D stuff to, a lot of times you're trying to develop 3D effects using 2D, and you have to do a lot of tricks to pull it off. And there's some ways that you can visually pull it off that convince the eye, but the work you have to go to make the effect real makes it very unusable for future uses. It's pretty much packaged up as a Photoshop bitmap or something. But now you can actually get specular, reflections and drop shadows, and they're actually programmatically created, and they're the blurs and the drop shadows that you've seen in your image editing applications that are, that you've basically tailored with a lot of finite detail. You don't lose any of that because the blur effect in Avalon or in code isn't as good. Rather the blur effect is just, with a lot of control, just like you would expect the designer wants.
So as a designer working on development programs, how important do you think it is that designers are actually tied in deeply to application development? Because in a lot of the development I've done in the past, is like, designers, okay, well, I can develop icons myself. I can lay this sort of stuff out myself. I don't need a designer. But now that with Longhorn, we're actually allowing the designer to play a more active role in that project. How important do you think that is to an application?
Well, obviously, high quality designed applications really, really improve the ability to sell applications. I mean, people want hot looking experiences. They want to feel like they know what they're doing when they get into the application. And, the designers, that's their heart, and that's where they really feel they want to be able to connect to the people that are using their applications. So, if I own the experience from beginning to end, I can jump in and change things. The design can evolve. A lot of times we're trying to solve problems and we don't have a full grasp of the problem until we've developed, 70% of the application. And then at that point, we're so invested in specific designs. Normally, it would be hard to go back and change things of the design, but now it's a lot slicker, quicker, easier to make immediate changes based on where you are in the process and what you're doing. I think it's incredibly important for designers to have a deeper and more responsible hand in what their design is.
So that the applications just like a spreadsheet, okay, functionally, maybe it's not going to work any better if the designer helped with it, but it's going to look better and feel better. Because it's kind of like, you can make the best cocktail in the world, but if you serve it in a Dixie cup, it's just not quite the same thing.
Right. It's like, where do you want to spend your time? I mean, if you're going to sit inside of an application for 8 hours a day, you want a good, beautiful, comfortable experience. And, this is a role that the designer needs to take responsibility for.
And that's part of our whole concept with Longhorn itself. I mean, Longhorn is spending an awful lot of time with the visualization on the surface of the screen. I mean, Windows has always been a lot of depth and technology behind the screen, but Longhorn's going to be the first release where we really took and tried putting that technology on the screen itself.
Right.
And so it looks well, it feels well, it feels like a well-moving sports car rather than just something that's got a really good engine under the hood. Yeah. Now I understand you've got a couple of demos you prepared to help us show us some of the aspects of what Avalon can do and what a Longhorn designer can take and bring to the table. Do you want to show this to us?
Sure. The first demo I've got here is one that we shipped with the PDC SDK. We call it login screen. Basically, the concept of the demo is that if you're logging into your application, you have different people in your family who have different personalities and different ways they want to experience their world. So we've provided multiple different themes or styles. It's kind of like skinning your application if you've used a Windows Media Player with the multiple different skins that you can use for that. I'll back up and say, I'll show a little bit of the markup here, but a lot of times, just because I am a designer, not a developer, I don't always know exactly, I can't explain in detail a lot of these things, but I think that's a testimony to the power of the platform that I can get in there and the conceptual pieces are still clear enough for me to use them that I can get in there and kind of design creatively and freely. So I'm going to jump into the markup and just show really quickly. But first, let me give you a little tour of the screen here.
But also, ideally, as the tools evolve to support XAML and Avalon program and stuff like that, you designer probably won't ever have to look at the markup.
Right.
You're going to be working in Photoshop or something like that, developing the layers and naming things, setting the font properties and stuff like that without actually touching this XML stuff.
Right. Well, I'd like to. There's two different kinds of designers. I mean, just like you can look at all the different kinds of developers who, rapid development. There's designers who've come from strictly living in a Photoshop world, and there's designers who have experienced basically the web revolution. And it basically came down to what was the most powerful version of Notepad you could get, something that would let you conceptualize in your head what you saw and not muck with your code, basically the 360-degree round-trip code experience. I want to be able to get in with a WYSIWYG environment, see things the way I see them, and then I basically learn values, and then I want to be able to get in there and just twist on those values, understand that, this was 10 pixels, and now I just want to just bump it over another couple pixels, and I know that from experience, that's how it is.
You're kind of a geeky designer. But
but there's a lot of geeky designers, and the contribution that they've had, and you can see the contribution in the experience that you see with applications that you see on the web now, that it's a pretty powerful experience that they give that I don't think we could always get just from straight people who can conceptualize the world in one application. At the same time, one of the coolest things that I love about the XAML markup language is that I can live in this world of my designer, completely see a bunch of properties and attributes and terms in the designer, and I feel pretty comfortable that I'm not going to have lots of strangled terms by the time I get to the markup and I need to try to find that one number I need to adjust. It's not going to be some completely weird term that I'm not used to. So that it should be a really slick, clean separation between both the design tool and the markup. But yeah, for the designers who live in a tool, this platform is being built totally toolable ready. I mean, that's the whole beauty of XML. So
okay.
Anyways, so looking at this application, I've got a few major elements on the page. First, we have on the screen here, you see this login screen. This is actually a logo. It's all drawn in vectors, and we'll show what the vectors look like when you zoom in on these a little closer. This is actually a list box over here. And we've actually stuck more than just text in our list box. I couldn't do this in HTML, and it's great that I can now. And sometimes I forget how cool this is because I've been putting images and things into list boxes.
Yeah, in the past, I would have to do some weird things with
right, custom control and
and it would have been a pain.
Yeah, so right now it's basically stick whatever you want in a list box, and you get selection state with it. Here we've got a password field. You can type into it, get your passwords. I've got a couple buttons, and that's basically it. And if we look at the XAML for this, the XAML is relatively straightforward. there's only let's see, 65 lines of code that make up this application, just for the markup. And the markup, this is basically, I could hand this off to the developer, and he could go start building functionality into it. And I don't really have, I basically know this is a common set of things that I can start designing styles around. And
So you're not responding to the button clicks. You're simply placing the button and understanding the button does have a click event.
Yep.
And you're setting the password property to the one text field to make sure it's a password, but you're not really doing any authentication code at all.
Right, right. I give things a bunch of IDs, and the developer knows how to manage those IDs, and then I can go actually use my styles to set to the specific IDs. So just like we're seeing on the page here, here's a bunch of the buttons. They've actually got a style called bottom toolbar where I actually set doc equals bottom to it within the styles. We've got our list box, and here's each one of our individual list items and the images and the text that were defined in the list items. And here's our text box with our password style on it and our sign in button. And what we do is we basically grab another style sheet, and this is kind of, I call it a style sheet. This is really for people who are familiar with CSS style sheets. You can define styles for a page, or you can define them for a whole application, just like you can define a style sheet that applies to a whole website. And what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the style sheet and changing out which style sheet the page is using. So as I click on different users, I get a totally different experience. So for Toby, the youngest member of the family, I get a very cartoon-like oriented interface. Very
So I mean,
fun.
we're noticing in that list box thing you had up there, which is, you're saying is just a regular list box. Suddenly, not only is it containing pictures are at different sizes,
Right.
and they're different orientations.
Right.
And that's being handled by the style sheet.
Right. So in this case, I've individually, on each individual element, I've set the style, but you could data bind this and like provide the specific changes you want for each individual. You can actually set basically data transformers to know which icons shift and which ones come up with different variables. So yeah, the arrangement is completely changed. I'll show this a little bit later, how in a list box, you can totally change a list box. Normally list boxes that you've seen, that you're used to, usually have like they're docked to the top, so they stack on top of each other. In this example, we've docked them all to the left of each other, so they stack horizontally. And I'll show that a little bit later. And talking about the vectors, this page, I kind of styled this one, to look a lot like Xbox style. It was, green and futuristic. And I just wanted to show really quickly that the buttons that we used to create, I'd create a button, and either in HTML I could say background equals green, and the whole button would either turn green, or it would replace it. My experience with Internet Explorer, that when we introduced Luna, the style for Luna, well, the visuals for the Luna button was basically a bitmap, that when you said background equals green, the bitmap didn't know what to do with that. And the end result was you couldn't really style the colors very quickly. You had to go back into your image editor, recreate a new bitmap, and export it out, and then create a new theme. In this, I'll show that buttons aren't actually created just of bitmaps anymore, but what you're actually seeing here, let me resize this thing, get our text to clear up, so now you can see that even at a large size, we've got clear type rendered text.
So now we've actually zoomed into the button.
Right.
And it's just a standard button. This is not a custom control that you developed.
No, this is just a button, and then what I've done is I've provided a style for that button. I've basically created a style resource, pointed to that resource, and it's all markup based. I never had to jump into any code yet. And basically what I described is there's three different rectangles here. One draws this first background, which is the gray one right here. There's a second rectangle that draws the green area, and that green area is actually lighting up yellow based on a trigger. As I mouse over this, we're just changing that one specific rectangle. And then there's one other rectangle that sits right above these, and these are all rounded rectangles, so all I've done is specified a corner radius for the rounded rectangles. What's cool about that is that I can actually, if I don't want my rectangles to be this round, if I just want a more subtle edge to it, I can actually just change the corner radius, and it just shows that button is a lot more extensible than it used to be. This is just a rectangle with a vertical gradient that goes from white to transparent, so it picks up the colors. But all I'm doing is setting the background color of one rectangle, and I get the fully redesigned UI for that button. It's just a lot more powerful than what we had before. And this applies to every control. So scroll bars and buttons and text boxes, every kind of control you can think of has.
And it's not like you have to go off and write a bunch of subclass code to take and handle different events and junk like that. You're basically just saying, okay, for this style, a button is defined this fashion.
Right, right. You have to know, there's a concept of visual trees. And what I usually, you can go and you can change the style of existing elements in the button's existing visual tree. So, for example, this button, if this was the default button, there's those 3 rectangles in there, and if I wanted just to go modify one specific area, I'd have to know how to get in and recreate the visual tree, define that specific style, and I could change different elements of that. But there is no having to recreate, like you're saying, no custom control here. It's what's exposed. I get to go in and break into it. I think from the designer point, one of the things that is really important to me is that a lot of times I don't like to pay the overhead of trying to understand what already exists. And one of the things I love about Visual Tree is that I can go in there and say, no, I just want to start fresh. I want all the behavior of button, but I don't want any of the visuals of button. And so I know that button has click events and things like that. But really, I just want to define the visuals for a bunch of states, and I don't want to have to think about what already existed, great features. I want to start building my own into it. And it allows me to go crazy and come up with all sorts of great.
So I mean, it's kind of like inheritance for a designer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it for this demo. The next demo I wanted to show, I was saying that we could do more than just button. I was just we had talked earlier about how Listbox, we stacked it with a dock panel that we made it stack horizontally instead of vertically. And so I have this
standard Listbox.
Yeah, so imagine that we've just navigated into a form page, and the question is, what state are you from? And for the sake of time, because I threw this together pretty quickly, I've only done the western states that I did, but
the important states.
The important states.
That's right. Yeah.
So
of course, the most important state's on the bottom, though. You should have reorganized that.
Oh, well, good point. So we've got it's just a basic list box. Behavior is the way we're expecting it to. And let me show the markup for that. In the markup for that list box, this is it right here. So we've just got list box and list item, and then basically specifying content equals CA, and you see there's Washington at the bottom. So I could just, change the order of that, jump that up to the top. So obviously that's not, showing the great, we can stuff a lot of stuff into list boxes. What I want to do is I've got another version of that list box that's commented out here. And I basically, like I was saying before, I've got a bunch of styles. I point to styles that are up in a resource.
Okay, so let's take a careful look here.
Okay.
So in the previous list box, you just had list margin and then list items. Here you got a list box setting the style, so you're pointing to a style sheet.
Right.
And then each list item, you also have individual styles associated with those as well.
Right.
But other than that, it's the exact same code.
Right.
You're just introducing the notion of a style.
Right. So I'll show really quickly here. On the list box, ignore this transform decorator here. This is just so I can size the whole thing, which is pretty cool because I can actually, I'm going to show that these are vectors. So I was able to actually resize this just to where I wanted. I didn't distort any bitmaps, and I got my list box to show just the exact size I wanted it to. But first, my list box has a style associated to it called list map. And if I look at, here's my list box style, here's the resource that I've defined the name for as list map. And the initial style for a list box is a dock panel, but what I've done is I've actually changed it to be a flow panel so that when the states display, if there's too many states, they'll wrap onto another line. And then for each state, I've got the style defined. So I'm pointing to the style Washington. If I scroll up here, here's the style for Washington. And what I've included in that style is a path And you'll see this is a long, long path thing right here. I'm going to grab right here and just move and show you how long. Well, basically, that all those numbers here are all the numbers that.
Should I memorize those?
No, this is where the designer lives in, why he lives in products like Adobe Illustrator and Macromedia Freehand, vector-based tools, and that's exactly what I did. I basically exported out of Adobe Illustrator and grabbed that path data, and just placed it in there, and I instantly got my outline for my state, and I had that for all these. I have a content presenter that handles the label for the state, and basically that's basically alias to that content element that we saw below that said CA, WA for the different two-letter symbols. And then I have my property triggers, and if you remember before in the login screen demo, when I moused over the button, it went from green to yellow. And so that's what I have going on, the same thing here. When the property from isMouseOver equals true, I'm actually changing the fill property of the path, the state outline path up here, to be lime green. And when I say the property is focused, so when I've actually selected that element in the list item, that item is going to become red. So I'm going to save this and then just refresh this page. And you can see here's all our states. And as I mouse over them, we get our property trigger, setting it to green. And when I select one of those, we've just selected within our list. And it's basically the same thing as selecting in this list to set the selected state. We're getting the same thing. So I'm ready to move on to the next state. Like I said, we made this a flow panel. So when I resize this, my elements are actually flowing onto the next line. But I just wanted to, to think outside the box for the list box. I wanted to change that element here, the flow panel, to a canvas. And one of the benefits when I exported all these graphics out, they were all positioned next to each other. All the states were positioned next to each other. So it's one of the reasons you see a lot of space between the different states as they exist right now. But by setting that to a canvas, they're going to absolutely position themselves based on where the paths were originally drawn. And so when I refresh this, I'll get my states all organized exactly where they were. And it actually doesn't even matter where they are in order. So Washington's at the bottom here, but it's actually in its correct spot. But when I mouse over these, I'm still getting my selection state, and I can still select on that element, and I get a much more dynamic, rich list box, all vector drawn.
So the reason they're coming into the right position is simply because the vector data had them in that position.
Exactly.
When you're in a flow panel, it was kind of ignoring that absolute positioning and doing it relative positioning and everything else.
Yep.
Now, I know, like when I was first looking at Avalon, I'm seeing dock panels, flow panels, canvas, and it was always kind of confusing to me to figure out, okay, when do I use one and when do I use another? And so repeating again, the flow panel is for what feature?
Flow panel is basically when you want things to wrap, flow from line to line. If you want just what we're used to seeing text do when we resize a web page, it flows down. That's
and then a canvas.
Canvas is absolutely positioning the elements, and dock panel is docking those elements into whether they dock left or top. And you're saying that you kind of confused about which one to do, and it is just like when you're working in your favorite design tool. It's like riding a bike. You just start learning tricks and techniques and ways of using things. I always kind of liken this back to in HTML. When you're doing designs, people start thinking of really crazy, cool ways to use tables. Tables are intended for tables. Showing tabular data, but it became one of the most powerful, and still is one of the most powerful ways of doing layout in HTML.
I use them all the time. It's the best feature about HTML is when tables came in.
Right, and the same thing with the platform as it is now. There's just so many things that designers are going to be figuring out really cool ways to pull off different effects, to do really different kind of layouts. They're at the same time, it's like, wow, we've kind of made, using a table wasn't exactly the most intuitive thing to do for design, and we've got solutions in the layout infrastructure that lets you do the tabular type layout, but it seems a lot more intuitive and not by accident, but like we were actually really planning it. So it's pretty pretty exciting that for me, because I just feel like there's just so much opportunity for me to play with all these different new ways of trying to figure out how to do layout.
And like even on here, all the new way you find out here of doing layout, of actually having the states in the right position. If Rob, for example, was actually doing the business logic code associated with this application or this form, whatever, he might still be thinking he's using a normal list box, but that's not what the user's saying, but it really doesn't matter.
Right, my code wouldn't have to change at all because he went ahead and did some great design work.
Yeah, yeah, and that's probably the benefit of having a designer working in a space that's slightly separate from the developer, is he can come up with these great ideas and actually implement them without impacting the developer. Now, Rob's kind of been keeping quiet this whole time since not being a designer, more of a developer. So maybe we kind of should shift gears and start talking about the developer side of things. So any designers out there in the audience, you guys can go ahead and leave, and we're not going to talk about geeky codey sort of things.
Right. Well, I wanted to be able to go in and show a few examples, diving into some more of the technology inside of XAML and the programming model for Avalon, and walk through some different technologies. Clearly, Nathan's designer skills came out there and showed how Avalon can take UI, documents, and media and do great things with it. And one of the things I work on, and really a lot of the companies working on right now, is making sure we have a great API for Avalon and for all of WinFX. So we want to make sure that people who want to program in C# or VB or C++ can go ahead and take advantage of all of those things. But clearly one of the new innovations we're providing is the ability to do all of this in markup as well.
Now, in your past as a developer, did you ever do any application development and add in things to it that maybe a designer probably should have been doing, but you took on that role yourself?
Yeah, clearly developers and designers the designers throw designs over the wall, and most of the time developers have to say, well, yes, I can do this, no, I can do this, and you end up with a product that's full of compromises from the original design.
So, since in the past you've kind of done some stuff that was doing the design layers type of work, and now we're saying in Longhorn, people like Nathan are going to actually be coming in and doing that design work, and that means stuff you're not doing. Do you feel maybe that some of your work is being pushed off into someone else and taking over from you?
I clearly don't have the skill set to build really compelling user interfaces. So I'm happy that I'm able to go ahead and separate my code into markup and into code, and separate responsibilities. So it's all golden.
So it's goodness to you then?
Yeah, absolutely goodness.
And if he makes you look good, then you end up looking good, right?
Right.
Right, okay.
Right.
Just tell your boss you did everything.
Absolutely. Okay, let me show you this demo here. This viewer application is built up of a few things. I'll dig into the markup and show some of the programming model behind this as well. On the left side, we have a list box, and using some of the technologies similar to the styling technologies that Nathan showed earlier, we actually have a rich data-bound list box to an XML data source, and we're using actually vectors here. We have an ellipse in the middle of our template for rendering of that data. We also, over here, have a frame that can go ahead and show documents and pages, and then up at the top we have a title area with some radio buttons. Now clearly these radio buttons are not as impressive as some of the things that Nathan could do. One of the interesting things is that I built this application without designer help, and I can now
the old way of development.
Exactly, the old way of development. And now I can hand it over to Nathan now that he's done building his demos and say, hey, make this look great. And he can go ahead and change the layout and change the styling of the application without breaking the application, without needing much of my time. So I'll switch over to Visual Studio in the XML editor here, and I'm using the collapsing feature here to excuse me, to hide some of the XML. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about XAML. So we use a XAML file, has the file extension .xaml, and which was originally called stood for Extensible Avalon Markup Language. We then thought for a little while Avalon wouldn't be a public name, so we called it Extensible Application Markup Language. Who knows what we'll end up calling it, but that's what we have now. You use a namespace and you say, hey, I'm using XAML. Over time, we'll actually change this to to be a generic technology, and XAML won't necessarily mean that you're using Avalon, but XAML will mean that you're using our rules to define a hierarchy of objects, and we'll call this more like Avalon. So in XAML, the namespace provides a mapping to a set of assemblies, DLLs, and a set of CLR namespaces to look for tags. So as we're parsing or compiling this XAML document, doc panel, we'll search for doc panel, a class named doc panel, in a few different assemblies that we've connected with this namespace, and we'll look in a set of CLR namespaces. So this provides a great way to have a declarative model to take advantage of a bunch of great code and programming models that people have built. What we do then also is we go ahead and take attributes, and attributes inside of our XAML document here are treated as properties on the class that we found. So we try to go ahead and set the background property on the doc panel, as most people would expect, and people can just go ahead and put khaki here. Now, under the covers, we're doing some fairly complex things. We figure out that the background is of type brush, and in order to convert from the word khaki to the right data object, we need to use a type converter. But to the markup developer, they're not concerned about that. We can also go ahead and use. So here, real quickly, you'll see that we have three major elements here. We have a resources section that has that's collapsed, that has some styles and other resources. Then we have three major other sections of the document. And we have the doc panel at the top that has an image, a set of radio buttons, and some text. We have a scroll viewer with a list box in it that has all the data bound.
List boxes with the ellipses and the names of the sessions in it.
Yes, absolutely. And so we went ahead and bound to a certain data source, and we had certain styles that went ahead and showed that. And then we had the frame that we actually are navigating all the content to. So let's jump back over here and take a look at a few things.
Okay, so here we have those three pieces again. So the top PDC Avalon session viewer, that was the first piece we saw.
Right.
And then the list view on the left-hand side.
Then we had the list view, and it was docked left, and then we had the frame that was taking over the rest of the area. Absolutely. So as I change the radio button selection here, as I click on demos, we actually want some code to run to go ahead and to navigate away from where we currently are and show some demos. Let me go show you how that code is done so you can see how the programming model integrates with the XAML.
Yeah, because in the code you have here, there's actually nothing associated. I mean, you've just got basically a blank tag. You're giving it a name and you're giving it one property of fill, but there's no content associated at all.
Right, it had no content at first, absolutely. So inside of the list box, you'll notice that we have an attribute called selection changed. And we just give it a method name to call called navigate frame. So whenever the selection changes in the list box, or whenever the selection changes inside of the radio button, we call that same function called navigate frame. Now, one of the things that we're doing with markup is we want people to have the benefit of XML during design time, but we don't want to have them pay the cost of XML at runtime. So the typical scenario will compile the XAML file into your application, and we'll do things. We'll basically catch any errors that you had, and we'll store it in a more compact form and a faster form to load. So you're not getting to a loose programming model just because you're using XML. Now, you're able to have a code behind file. Here I've got an $code behind attribute pointing towards pane1.xaml.cs, and I'll show that file in a second. And we'll go there. Our compilation system will actually create a class for this page under the covers in your application. So a developer will need to know this. Most people won't need to know exactly how it works, but you're able to give a namespace name, viewer is what I chose, and a class name for the generated class for when we compile pane1.xaml as part of the build process. We have a matching file called pane1.xaml.cs. That matching file needs to go ahead and have the same namespace viewer, and needs to have a class called pane1 as well. Mm-hmm. Now, we're taking advantage of a great new feature in the WDB version of the CLR, and that's something called partial classes. that allows a developer, a C# developer or VB developer, or other languages that want to take advantage of this, to build two different CS files or VB files and define two different parts of the same class in two different places. We're taking advantage of that, except we've got a little twist on it. We're not having two CS files that both define the same class. Instead, we have a XAML file and a C# file. So when you go ahead,
turning XAML into just yet another language.
yes, absolutely. So XAML and you choose your programming language of choice, work together to go ahead and build your application. So we'll go ahead and build a .g.cs file, a generated C# file for you underneath the obj directory if you want to go look at it. And we'll go ahead and tie things together so that everything initializes great, and that when you put IDs on elements, they'll be programmatically accessible from your code easily. So we'll do a lot of things there for you. And that class will be a partial class. So, and this class is the partial class. And when we go ahead and build the application, together they will make this page a reality. So next, so here we had the navigate frame routine, and we just happened to go ahead and we basically make sure that the list box isn't null and there's a selected item, and the radio buttons have a selected item as well, and do the appropriate thing to, we basically go figure out what URI to navigate the frame to. And we go ahead and do that.
And then that fills the content for that frame that was contentless. Now it's actually getting content.
Exactly. So you'll see we navigated here to a list of demos. I'll take this opportunity to show a little bit about, talk to you a little bit more about panels and show you some examples of the panels you were talking about earlier with Nathan. So we got a flexible system for layout, and we have a set of controls, a set of elements that we call panels that provide the ability for you to do layout in Avalon. You typically do nesting of a hierarchy of elements, and that's why XML is such a great way to write or read about your code. We'll nest these panels together to get the effect that you want to have. We'll first look at a dock panel, and as we're maximized here, we had 5 different buttons inside of a dock panel attribute, inside of a dock panel element. And the first one is dock to the top, the second one is dock to the left, the third is dock to the bottom, the fourth to the right, and then the fifth takes up the rest of the space.
So I guess if you're thinking from an HTML programmer model, this would be similar to frame sets in HTML, in that it's filling up all the available space.
Yes, absolutely. But a lot of times in HTML, people avoided frames because of all the navigation side effects, et cetera. So, but yeah, yes, absolutely. So as people resize applications, though, you're able to have flexible layout systems that take advantage of these different panels. I'll go ahead and click back here. You'll notice I have a navigation application that was just kind of an afterthought to go ahead and integrate into my application. I'll show you also a flow panel here. Here we just have 16 different rectangles inside of a flow panel, and you'll notice as I size, I'm able to go ahead and get nice things. So yeah, one of my pet peeves is when you open a dialog or a window and they give you a fixed surface to deal with, a fixed size that they think is appropriate for you, and you have a larger screen or you have different needs. I'd really like to be able to resize almost anything, and I think Avalon is going to make it a lot easier for people to build resizable applications.
So that means you could take like a dialog box, and as long as the dialog box was properly segmented into proper flow panels, you could have radio buttons and list boxes and buttons and stuff like that in the dialog box. And rather than staying in the exact same location, if you were even capable of sizing the box, they would just automatically flow, and the user then would have control over how those flowed to a certain extent, whether it flew long or wide or...
Right, yeah, when you have, like, say, a label and a text box, that's a great example of something that could be side by side, or could also be on top, in a narrow window could work as well. So there's a lot of great building blocks here that people can take advantage of. And then the last one is just the canvas example here, and this canvas shows a bunch of shapes, yet another type of elements that we have inside of Avalon. And you'll see some of these things are docked to the bottom, the picture and the text as I scroll up and down, as I resize up and down here a little bit, and we have an animating circle here. So you've seen some controls, you've seen some panels, and you've seen some shapes as well. We have one other major category of elements inside of Avalon that people would be interested in, and that's the what we call content elements. And you can use them in a couple different ways. One way is just, a content element is really just a way to build great documents for great reading experiences. So you have things that are semantic, like paragraphs and sections, and then you have a few elements that do just hardcore formatting of italic or other things like that as well.
So this is like what David was talking about in the first segment, where now we have basically this document control sitting there, where you're getting flowing of text in multi-column. So we've got two columns being shown there on the screen, and it's just automatically allowing stuff to flow properly.
Right. So yeah, we're able to focus on making, getting the system's able to help you build a great reading experience. So as I'm able to go ahead and choose percentages here, as I go ahead and shrink down, I get a bunch of columns. If I go ahead and zoom up, I'm going to get fewer columns as well. And the user's going to have a great reading experience for this content. So these are flow documents. And once again, inside of this, we're just using other XAML elements. So you're able to have a consistent programming model across the great UI and media things that we were just doing all the way into documents as well. One of the things that I also show in this demo is the ability to take any application and choose to print to XAML as well. We have something called the Windows Client Print Driver. And we're able to go ahead and if I click on slides here, I went to PowerPoint and took my slide presentation and decided to go ahead and print it. And it persisted it in a XAML file. And
so you're not displaying bitmaps here, you're actually displaying XAML.
Right, absolutely. I'm displaying XAML here. And I'll actually go show you the XAML. It's not very pretty, but let's jump over to Visual Studio and go look at the slides there. In a fixed document here, we have a document tag at the root and a fixed panel. And then for every page, we have a fixed page and we have certain sizes. And then inside of there, instead of using content elements, we're really using shapes, paths, images, glyphs. And glyphs are doing the rendering of the characters. So you'll see in the glyphs down below that the characters here are actually these are the characters that are being rendered. So if I went ahead and changed this to 47 instead of 53 and reran this application and navigated to that slide presentation, we'll actually have changed that. We'll have changed that text from an R to an L. And you'll notice that the positioning of those characters is still going to be fixed. It's not going to reflow. It's going to go ahead and use the original positioning.
And so basically all we did is we wrote a print driver that, PowerPoint doesn't know exactly what printer it's going to. It's just calling the right print driver. And that print driver is intercepting the printing commands that PowerPoint is sending us. Here's how I want to print these things. And rather than just simply rendering as a bitmap, says, I know how to render this as XAML. In the same way, I remember a long time ago, we wrote a print driver for HTML, so you'd actually print to HTML. In the same way, people like Adobe could take and save a file out as a XAML file, similar to what we showed them doing at the PDC.
Right, absolutely. So you'll notice we zoom in here and we have some great text, and there we go. We end up with Lob instead of Rob. So hopefully this demo has just shown you that we can work. We've split things up into the declarative markup side and the programming model side, and we've allowed people to involve designers in the declarative markup if they want. We've seen panels and controls and content elements and shapes as well.
And from a programmer's perspective, let's assume you're watching the show and you're seeing some of these changes coming through with XAML and how it works with the C# code or VB code, whatever you're writing. Today, people really obviously aren't writing Longhorn applications. Longhorn's not available yet. It's not even in beta. What should a programmer today be thinking about in reference to getting prepared in some fashion for Longhorn? Whether it's in the applications they're currently writing today that are running on Windows XP or Windows 2000, or just in thinking about developing application, the design necessary for it.
Right. It's a great question. The developers need to make sure that their skill set and their applications are as ready for Longhorn as possible if they want to jump on to this opportunity. moving applications and skill sets towards .NET is clearly a great way to go. We are using .NET through and through in Windows Longhorn. WinFX is the API for Windows Longhorn, and it will have .NET great APIs throughout. So learning about start moving to Windows Forms, moving to ASP.NET if you're doing client programming or server programming, and moving code in that direction, and moving your skill set in that direction to prepare you. Also, building applications that separate the UI logic from the business logic will help you make the transition as well. And then for those people who have the time, we'd love to have people start playing with the bits now through MSDN or the PDC bits that we had, and giving us feedback. I love to see all the articles, the blog articles and blog posts and other things like that, where people are saying, I'm trying to do this, this is what I did, I loved this about it, and I hated this about it, and I actually want to hear more things about how people aren't liking some of the things so that we can fix them before we're done. But I think, jumping onto .NET, moving applications that way, moving your skill sets that way, is the way to prepare for Avalon.
No, I know Nathan's actually got a blog out there. Do you have a blog too, or?
Yep, I'm on Longhorn, longhornblogs.com.
Okay, I'll make sure I put a link to both you guys' blogs up on the transcript. So they just have to open up the transcript and go to the bottom and they'll see all those blogs there. Nathan, what are some of the inputs you have on what people should start thinking about? I mean, is there anything a designer needs to be thinking about in preparing for Longhorn and what it means? Or are we expecting the tools they're currently using just simply to start supporting it and it just works better?
I think I like that vision of the world where, designers just kind of want to be free and not encumbered by changes, but learn the tools that you feel comfortable in. Be creative. If you're a geek designer like me, take the opportunity to get your head around what it's like to navigate through gobs and gobs of XML. But get comfortable in your tools and be ready. I guess one of the biggest things is don't start thinking about how certain features that you use in your tool, not how to dumb them down, but how to let the platform enhance those features. So if you've got an element that would normally become a bitmap and it could be a vector, think about how you could recreate this as a vector, and then how that element could be reused and programmatically updated.
So when I use painting type tools, I use Paint Shop Pro, I normally prefer using it in bitmap mode just because that's what I end up using in my applications, and I know I can go down twiddle at the very pixel level exactly what color is happening. And the vector side of the tools are always kind of on the odder side for me. I don't quite feel as comfortable because they seem more nebulous. But you're kind of saying to the designers that if you're used to working in pixel mode, start focusing on the vector side of things and understand how the vector things work.
There's just certain things that you can't do in vectors, and but there are certain things that when you do use vectors, you can do just incredibly powerful things with them. So the reuse is my biggest win, but there are certain techniques. The gel button technique that we see used all over the place is a perfect example that you can pull off a very realistic looking gel button using only vectors. At the same time, mixed media, being prepared to mix bitmaps with vectors opens up a lot of opportunities. Start thinking, instead of just using bitmaps, start thinking about using video as textures. You can do amazing, amazing things using video as textures. And since this will be all hardware accelerated, it's not far-fetched to be able to do that and have it still be an incredibly performant app. Start thinking about anything can be used. No rules. This is a really cool platform.
Would it make sense maybe also for me, the developer and designer, to go out for coffee once in a while, at least become better friends so they can work better together as a team?
Yeah, we're blazing new trails. I've been working on some real code pieces that are going into the UI for the platform or for Windows, and it's been a real learning experience to figure out how we best work together. So there's new processes that need to be learned. So far, it's been a lot better than it has been before, and that's with learning new and pioneering new ways of doing it. I've handed them their stuff, and they've checked it in, and added all their modifications, and then passed it back to me, and things got moved around, but it still looked familiar enough that I was able to dig in and clean up areas that I saw. And so, yeah, I mean, you need to have that relationship so that because the developer's always going to look at the markup that I create and see it and need to change it to something that makes more sense to them. And so you need to be prepared for that. But and I guess there's an evolution. I feel like the designer is going to become more, has the ability and has the opportunity to become more geeky and more empowered by what they can do with markup. And at the same time, the developer should feel more empowered to be able to do better, cooler design things, and not have it be so far out of their reach to do the right cool thing.
Maybe like, designers and geeky just doesn't kind of seem, probably we need a new term rather than geek, maybe, techno savvy or something like that, something that looks like more of a turtleneck sort of approach to things. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm sure that our audience appreciated hearing from the designer and the developer what it means to develop Longhorn applications and what XAML is going to mean to them moving forward, and how even though Longhorn's still not available yet in the mainstream, they can still be thinking about it and be prepared for when it finally does come out. Thanks.
Thank you.
So hopefully that gives you some idea of what Longhorn is overall, and specifically Avalon, and how the new graphics model is going to be changing. Avalon isn't just the standard buttons, radio boxes, and brushes and pens that you might have used in standard Windows development, but it incorporates this new thing called XAML, includes style sheets, new ways of doing buttons and list boxes, and exciting media and document sorts of things in your applications. So hopefully we'll see an extreme amount of rich applications coming out for Longhorn that take full advantage of the new features we have added to it. Catch you later.
With me today is Eileen Crane, Marketing Manager for the Microsoft Regional Director Program. Eileen, welcome.
Thank you.
So Microsoft Regional Directors, what are those?
They are a third-party group of individuals, for the most part, partners and influencers around the world who work really closely with developers in their own community, who are really excited about technology, are primarily Microsoft developers, Microsoft solution providers. And these individuals are volunteers for Microsoft who spend time learning about our technology and going out to their community of developers and helping those developers understand how to use our tools.
So they're like evangelizing for Microsoft.
They really extend our evangelism efforts. They're just excited about technology and help us deliver the message around the world.
So are they like MVPs, or how are they different from MVPs?
They are like MVPs in that, like a number of programs Microsoft has, all of these programs are focused on outreach to the developer community. So they're sort of, both programs are a conduit for getting information out to the community. The differences really are the RDs are more focused on a solution overall. So they take into consideration everything a developer does, from the architecture, the design, to the actual building of the product. So they have to really understand a broad range of technologies, where the MVPs are usually more focused on one or two specific technologies, and we recognize them based on those technologies.
Okay. So what do you do specifically for the program?
I spend a lot of time promoting the program in some ways. The hardest part of the program is identifying influencers. Try to determine, what's an influencer? What does that really mean? How does Microsoft measure that type of thing? And how do we decide this is someone who's out there influencing? It's easy to say, yes, this person's writing books, but to really measure and look at, well, who should we bring into this program and really give this information to? That's kind of the biggest part. Once you've made that decision and you have your great group of influencers, it's connecting them at Microsoft, making sure they know the right product team people so they're getting the right information, and then connecting them outside into the third-party opportunities such as conferences, writing opportunities, and really connecting them even with places like MSDN and making sure that their content is out there so that their name stays really visible.
Okay. So how many RDs do you have currently in the program?
Today, for the 2004 program, we have 140 RDs. We're in 60 different countries, so we have a really good mix around the world. About 60% are outside the U.S. The largest concentration is really in Europe, where we have slightly over 50, and then spread out around the U.S., around 30 in the U.S., and then the rest of the world.
Okay, so is it easy to gain new RDs, or do you find you only get a few extra ones each year?
It's the program no one wants to leave. So it's not hard to find good people who are excited about technology. It is hard to find good people who are excited about technology, have the time and passion to deliver the message to the developers, and really can make a commitment to that. A lot of these guys, and I say guys because the majority are men. We have 4 women out of 140. And the majority of these individuals run their own businesses. So to take the time, and it could be 20 hours a month. I mean, it could be 2 hours a week. It depends on really their own schedules. But to find the time is the hardest part. So it's hard to find the right mix. And so each year we take a look again and say, hey, is this mutually beneficial for Microsoft as well as the RD? And we have pretty much turnover every year.
Okay. And so have you always had marketing related jobs at Microsoft?
I have. Pretty much marketing and business development, all external communication, sort of take either a message that Microsoft has to deliver to an audience or a program or a product and try to make it make sense to that community so they understand what the value is for them.
Okay. And so what type of things do you like to do outside of work?
Outside of work, I like to spend time with my son. Really kind of a homebody, so I have a new house, like to do projects around the house, work out every day, things like that. But I admit to spending a lot of time working.
Yeah.
It's really hard not to get excited about Microsoft, you know that, but it's also really hard not to get excited about all these really passionate people that I work with, both in Microsoft and the RDs. And when you're dealing with 60 countries in every time zone, there is always someone online.
Right. And so you said you have a new house. What sort of projects have you been working on there?
All improvements. So gardening and, painting around the fireplace and things like that. Just really shopping for art and fun stuff like that. All the fun stuff.
And do you have any other type of hobbies?
Let's see. I'm thinking of taking up rowing this year. So I'm needing some tips, though. I know they do it out on Lake Washington, but I'm thinking, do they do it on Lake Sammamish? Because how am I going to get all the way over to the city to go every night? So other than that, shopping. That's a good one right there.
That's a good one. It's a good place to do it.
Exactly.
So, Eileen, what would you say is the best thing about your job?
Best thing about my job is the people. And I used to say at Microsoft, best thing about my job was the people at Microsoft. Now the best thing at my job is the regional directors. These are a community in and of themselves, first of all, which is an awesome thing. They're a support system for each other. They're friends. They stay with each other. They invite me to stay at their house. I mean, they're just a great group of friends. And then beyond that, they do something for Microsoft that you couldn't pay somebody to do. Their passion and enthusiasm, it's contagious. And it's just the best thing to know that every day you're going to be helping them with their careers. You're going to be helping developers in the community. It's just really exciting. They're exciting people and just really a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah, I've met some of them at conferences. They're fun.
They are. They are some well-spoken and outspoken individuals, and definitely some of our best speakers.
That's great. Well, Eileen, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been great.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the .NET Show.
And stay tuned for the next episode on the fundamentals of Longhorn.
And until then, we'll see you on the web.